Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, COVID-19 Conversations, Maintaining a Respectful Workplace as Businesses Reopen. My name is Gabby Lemon, and I'm the event specialist here at Workplace Safety North. We appreciate your attendance here today and want to let you know COVID-19 Conversations is an ongoing webinar series that features a monthly webinar from May to October on issues related to the current global pandemic. Before we get started, we'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. Your microphones have been muted, and we ask that you use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen for speaker questions. If you have any technical issues using the Zoom application, do let us know in the chat box, and we'll do our best to help you. So to clarify, please put any commentary or technical questions in the chat box and speaker questions in the Q&A section. Resource information and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within one business day. Now I'd like to pass things over to host Angel Poitras, Community Engagement Specialist and Certified Psychological Health and Safety Advisor at Workplace Safety North. Welcome, Angel.
Welcome. Thank you, Gabby. This is our fourth conversation in our series, and I want to thank each and every one of you for continuing to join us monthly. So many of us are looking at returning to our workplaces as more and more of our world opens up and we enter into our new norm. Some of us have been home office based and our children have not been in school or daycares for months. This is about to change for some of us. A StatsCan poll showed that 4 out of 10 workers did not feel safe in returning to their workplaces. 58% of us said getting COVID was a big concern of ours, biggest concern since April. But that also means 6 out of 10 workers feel safe going back. That means 42% aren't afraid of contracting COVID. Soon or recently, these two mindsets will converge on our workplaces, and we will need to find respectful ways to have conversations. My guests and I will explore today respect in the workplace, what it can look like not only for our staff, but also clients. As in the past, we've grouped your questions into 3 main themes, and they will be different viewpoints, stress and anxiety, and general. And for those of you who've joined us in the past, you know we do a poll question. So our poll question today is this: I am comfortable returning to work, or I am not uncomfortable returning to work. This helps provide a bit of an overview to our panel, our guests, as to where we are at right now. So while you're getting ready to answer the poll question, I'll explain a little bit about Workplace Safety North to you. We're a partner in the health and safety system of Ontario. We're extremely proud of our northern roots. We like to call ourselves proud in plaid. We live, work, and play in the north. We provide consulting solutions, educational solutions, and training solutions around health and safety. And as you can imagine right now, our teams are extremely busy helping you and your workplaces get ready to go back to work, or for those of you who've already gone back to work, we've been helping you to do that. We are always available, so please check our website, workplacesafetynorth.com, and reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help you out. So Gabby, do we have any poll results? Wow, 73% of our guests today are comfortable returning to the workplace, and 27% aren't. So this is really helpful to our guests, so thank you for taking the time to answer the poll. So I'd like to introduce you to our 2 special guests today. Our first guest is Helen Francis. Helen is the CEO of the Northeastern YMCA. Her prior career was in mining, where she worked for 20 years at Inco and subsequently Vale. Her background was in geological and mining engineering. However, since moving back to Canada over 20 years ago, Helen has volunteered in the not-for-profit sector, predominantly in governance roles at the YWCA of Sudbury and at the YMCA of Sudbury, and subsequently the YMCA of Northeastern Ontario. Helen's work at the YMCA of Northeastern Ontario focuses on ensuring sustainability, relevance, and impact of the programs and services delivered through employment and immigration services, childcare, youth and family development, and their camping programs, as well as, of course, their health, fitness, and aquatics at the 2 facilities located in Sudbury and North Bay. Welcome, Helen. Thank you for making time to join us today, which I'm sure is a very busy schedule that you have. And our second guest today is Paul Andre, somebody who I am thrilled to work with each and every day. Paul is the CEO of Workplace Safety North. Paul Andre was appointed as President and Chief Executive Officer at Workplace Safety North on April the 30th, 2018. Paul served as Vice President of Prevention Services at Workplace Safety North since 2010 and is the former CEO of the Pulp and Paper Health and Safety Association. With more than 28 years of experience in Ontario's prevention system, he is also a past volunteer and the past board chair of the Board of the Canadian Registered Safety Professionals. Through his work with boards of directors, as well as industry and prevention system partners, Paul has established a reputation as a strong and collaborative leader in health and safety promotion. He leads Workplace Safety North in building on his successes and executing a transformative strategic plan designed to bring every worker home safe and healthy. Paul and Helen, welcome. So Helen and Paul, you can unmute. Thank you. Wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
So Paul and Helen, top of mind has to be going back to school. So I think that it would be helpful to our participants, our viewers, if we acknowledge this. So you can acknowledge it in the frame of your own personal experiences or experiences of those around you, or even your own personal thoughts. And maybe try to relate it back to respect, because I think some of the learnings that we're going to see in the next few weeks about going back to school can be easily transferable to our workplaces. So Helen, if you wouldn't mind giving us your opinion on this.
Certainly. So first of all, thank you very much for the invite, and hello everybody. It's nice to be here today. Absolutely, return to work and school return is definitely top of mind for most people. For us at the Y, it's actually been a component of our thought process pretty much ever since the pandemic resulted in a lockdown for the majority. Because we operate in childcare, we've had to look at how we can open our childcare centres and licensed home care are for essential service work from the beginning. So we had to look at whether we had staff able and ready to return. And naturally, just like in the population, we have a broad cross-section of staff in terms of their ability to return and work in a potentially COVID-present environment versus other staff that for many different reasons, but include underlying health conditions for themselves or their immediate family, where that was just too big a take. So moving forward, and even through that process, we've tried to be extremely respectful, and it's one of our core values around how we embrace everybody with dignity that works for us and volunteers for us and comes into our facilities in any way, shape, or form. And understand that everyone is making those decisions coming from a bit of a different perspective. So that's how we continue to operate as we move forward. And part of the way we've tried to approach that, because for all of us, we're all learning a little bit about what COVID-19 means, what are the risks, how does it change as the scientists understand more about that disease. So we've also taken a very collaborative approach and relied heavily on collective input from our staff through our joint health safety committees, working in parallel with our public health, Workplace Safety North have participated a lot, and other subject matter experts from across Y Canada family. And that for us has been quite successful in helping people understand the protocols we have in play and how it will reduce the risk if we all try to do our best of applying them.
Well, thank you, Helen. Paul, do you have anything you'd like to share as we return back to school?
Yeah, I certainly don't have personal experience of this year having kids going back to school. I'm past that time frame, but certainly I've been reaching out to our own employees that have school-age children and really thinking about this in terms of what this looks like across the province. So that's, I think, a little bit north of 2 million students returning back in a couple of weeks. Well over 100,000 educators, school teachers, custodian staff, bus drivers. So it's a very large cohort of individuals that are returning to the workplace, either as a student or as someone within a work environment. So I've been touching base with our own employees and really just, getting their view in terms of what are their plans. Are they going back to school in terms of sending them back to classes, or are they doing online learning? And just letting them know that in the context of respect, as you mentioned, Angel, it really is about your choice is a personal choice. It's the right choice based on the circumstances that you have around you. And if there's need for accommodation, let's have that discussion based on your choice, whether you're going in class or online. So I think early on, it's been about internal conversations for us, but I certainly empathize and appreciate the fact that there are so many people returning to work in a couple weeks.
Well, thank you. And I think I can speak for all of us that are on the call. A huge shout out to those that are going back in the next few weeks. We extend our thanks and our appreciation. And I'm sure if there's anything we can do to help you out, please let us know. And there's one thing I neglected to mention at the beginning. Occasionally, you will see Gabby pop in live. And what she will be doing at that point is she will be bringing forth your questions. So we encourage you, use the Q&A box. And if there's questions that come to mind as we're walking through this conversation, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and Gabby will bring them to our attention. Because much like our other conversations, this is your conversation. So we want you to feel that you're an actual part of it. So what we did is we asked you if you had questions around respect in the workplace, and we reviewed them all. And as in the past, we looked at also the research that was happening around the particular topic, and we've grouped them into three main categories. So the three categories that will encompass your questions and recent research will be different viewpoints, general, excuse me, and stress and anxiety. So those are the three groupings that we have for today's session. But if you have something that fits even outside of those boxes, please feel free to ask your questions. So it's interesting. I was having a conversation with a colleague this morning, and we were talking about, your mother always told you, or somebody always told you, never talk about politics and religion at the dinner table. And now we've added a third to that: politics, religion, and COVID. There's certainly two very different trains of thought. Each of us is approaching the pandemic differently. So Paul and Helen, our question to you is, how do you address this with your teams? How do you address this with your clients? And have you addressed it within your return to work plans? So just in a nutshell, how have you addressed the different viewpoints? So who would like to go first? I see a lot of head nodding, so that means there was a lot of thought process going on.
I can jump in. Really, right from the onset of the pandemic, we were fortunate that we had quite a lot of support from our federation to help us think through all the key dimensions for how we would be able to reopen programs, services, facilities, with really the main lens being our responsibility to maintain and prevent further COVID transmission, to secure the safety of our staff, volunteers, community at large. And we've taken the principled approach that we would really rely on our public health guidelines to really direct what protocols we need to put in place. And then above and beyond that, working across Y Canada and recognizing that, there are different levels of COVID transmission and caseload profiles that are being experienced in different regions. Also try to make sure that we establish ourselves as a bit of a gold standard so that we can ensure that we're one of the safer, if not the safest places to return to. That's obviously critically important when, yes, we're a charity, but we also do rely on our client member confidence in order to continue to be able to operate. And so we recognized right from the get-go that we needed to do everything in our capacity to maintain that health, wellness, and safety component. And as such, that is the conversation that we've had with our staff and volunteers, and everyone understands that that's a requirement for us to be remain viable and stay in operation. Nobody wants to be the facility that has to report an outbreak. We're also fortunate that through all the childcare centres that have opened through Y Canada even in the GTA with a high caseload, since the beginning of the pandemic, we have not had one single outbreak because we've been following those protocols, which has boosted the confidence for our staff team. However, we are anticipating that our staff will be challenged a little bit differently as we start to open our doors in health, fitness, and aquatics. And we have seen in Ys that have opened elsewhere, a little bit in Ontario, but in other provinces, that member conflict over protocols around health and safety is probably a bigger topic than anybody ever really anticipated. And so on the one hand, members are great at trying to make sure people maintain and follow the etiquette that we have in our facilities. And on the other hand, of course, with everyone having some different experiences and concerns around COVID, it can lead to member-to-member conflict over why aren't you wearing a mask, or you're not physically distancing, or you haven't washed your hands, et cetera, et cetera. And so for our staff team, I will say that our membership services desk, folks particularly, and everyone working on the floor, we are anticipating that it will become a bit more of a conversation and training requirement on how to bring down the heat in some of those conversations respectfully, and not needing to police the situation, but to really make sure that everyone stays calm and respectful throughout the entire process.
Well, thank you for that, Helen. That's an interesting concept. It'll be your front line, those gatekeepers, the one that control the little gate. You do really have a gate there. Interestingly enough, though, how are you going to support those people? They're the ones that, if there is going to be confrontation, it will be them that will have the first sense of the confrontation. And what we did in the last few months, we did some caring COVID calls where we called each person individually. And we thought these would be quick calls. Well, they turned out to be 1 hour long calls. And what we quickly found out, and I see Paul nodding his head, is that people need to talk and they need to be listened to. But then you also have the realm, how do you support good, strong psychological safety? And that would be my question. Even though we don't want to turn them into police or gatekeepers, how are we going to respect their mental health and how will we take care of them? Have you given some thought to that, Helen?
Yeah, I think we are very much relying on the ongoing build of an open dialogue with all of our staff that are present moving forward. Really love the idea of the caring kind of COVID calls that you've described. And we will need to make sure that we have got some regular, very frequent touch bases with our staff return, not only to check in on how it's the workplace, but inevitably, as we've touched upon with school return and anything else that happens in own individual lives, the ongoing uncertain anxieties that pop up. And it's going to be important for us to understand that, particularly as when we come back, we will be in probably a leaner team than we have had in the past too. So how we respond and being prepared, I do course correct, pending on that feedback, will be important for us to keep everybody happy and well.
Great, thanks for that. And Paul?
Yeah, certainly I agree with your perspective on religion and politics, but I think in the context of COVID, I think internally we've certainly had more conversations than we've ever had. What was a monthly all-staff meeting turned into a weekly all-staff meeting. What were team meetings that perhaps occurred on a bi-weekly basis started occurring weekly, and following the calls that you mentioned, Angel, regarding just touching base with each individual employee, that really reinforced, I think, with the leadership team that it was not enough to just have team meetings. We needed to have those individual discussions, but certainly each individual circumstance is unique. So everyone's dealing with a unique set of circumstances around them. They certainly have their own thoughts, their own feelings, which influence their behaviors and their perspective as it relates to the pandemic. So having those individual conversations either on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, I've certainly had some employees that say, Paul, you don't need to call me weekly, but every 2 weeks is a nice thing. But nonetheless, making sure that we're reaching out, we're touching base with each and every employee, just really to see how they're doing through this pandemic. So I think, on the communication side, there's certainly been more communication. In terms of return to work, just to maybe frame our experience, certainly we never really closed down. We, on March 12th, we all went to our home offices and we took a pause from face-to-face delivery that we're accustomed to as an association for 5 or 6 weeks. But our reopening plan was largely aligned to the province's staged reopening plan. So we had activities that we were undertaking at stage 1, activities that we were undertaking at stage 2, and then again at stage 3. And stage 3 included reopening physical offices, which I find myself in today. But through each of those stages, certainly the involvement of staff in conducting risk assessments, so taking those subject matter experts, ensuring that we're looking at each of those activities or each of those processes, thinking about where are the risks, what controls do we need in place, having their involvement, taking that, involving the Joint Health and Safety Committee and reviewing it and inputting into it, and then further communicating that out. So there really has been a need for, I would say, constant communication, certainly internally, and I would say the same externally, because we're serving largely a clientele that was deemed essential right from the beginning of the pandemic. So mining sector, forestry sector, paper printing, converting sector, they were all deemed essential right at the start of the pandemic. So we continued to provide support. Certainly our mine rescue stations across the province remained open and emergency ready should they be required in an emergency during the pandemic. So it's a little bit different lens depending on whether it's internal or external, but certainly communication, and from my perspective, has been extremely important. And the more the better, because you'd often get to that weekly all staff meeting and think, okay, not a lot has changed since last week, but you'd find yourself there just reinforcing some of those key messages, and those were important throughout those early days.
Thank you for that, for Paul. And interestingly enough, too, during these numerous communication touch points, there was always the respect for the difference of opinion. And I think that's a strong takeaway lesson that we can share with others. And there's our friend Gabby. So that means our audience has a question. Hello, Gabby.
Hi, thanks, Angel. Yeah, so Paul, we have a question for you. Someone said, Paul, you used the word accommodation. What high risk or vulnerable employees have been the most difficult to accommodate in developing policies and procedures for return to the workplace, and how?
Yeah, again, I think, it really needs to be employee centric in terms of individual employee centric. So each individual circumstance is unique in its own right. So we have, I think early on in the pandemic, I can use the example of, an employee whose spouse is a frontline worker with young children at home. And certainly, that individual needed accommodation to be able to say, listen, I need to focus on, one, providing support for my children, making sure that they're conducting their online learning, that their education is continuing, a lot of moving pieces. So I think, as a leadership team and as an organization, it's certainly a time to be kind, to be compassionate, to think about the individual circumstances that each employee is going through, and see how we could best accommodate that. So that's one example. Another example would be someone who's dealing with elder care and simply needs the time to be able to take time during the day to be able to support that individual. So having flexibility in terms of work hours, what this looked like early on in the pandemic, certainly important, but very specific to the individual circumstance. No one policy, no one approach across the organization. It was really based on that individual circumstance.
Thank you, Paul. And Gabby, you have a second question?
Yeah, so another question just came in related to the communications piece. So this could be for either or to answer, but Someone mentioned communication is a key factor to help everyone. What key tips can you share that would assist those that have not started their communication to staff?
I'll just jump in on the point, Paul. I highly recommend that frequent and often communication is really necessary for everybody. Even if you think there's not to update on it, it's important for folks to have that touch base. But it also may mean there are still questions that your staff have that haven't been answered fully, and it gives them an opportunity to them. The other, I was learning that we were able to beg, borrow, and steal from a other Y in Ontario, is that upon opening, and this is specific to childcare centres, some of the YMCAs in the GTA opened up for essential frontline workers ahead of us in Northeastern Ontario. But it gave the opportunity to see that they can approach where they brought in their local public health to have a direct conversation with their staff team and really allow the scientists and the folks with the knowledge around epidemiology and disease and what that means and the protocol knowledge to explain why certain protocols were being recommended to speak directly to the staff. Again, it's just another way to build confidence that they're hearing the information from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And that worked well, as has providing a little bit of a video overview to staff that may not yet have returned to work but are planning on it, to see how is it actually working in those facilities. What might it look like? What can I expect? What are those protocols? And I think it's about trying wherever you can to reduce the uncertainty and answer the questions as they come up, and just being prepared to continue to add to that information.
And just to kind of wrap it up around different viewpoints, there was a question that came in. If people are allowed to speak about their insecurities or anxieties around the pandemic, COVID-19, should those that raise an alternative viewpoint also be allowed to voice their opinions? So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that you have to be open to all opinions if we're truly describing ourselves as an inclusive organization, which is exactly what we want to be. And how we respond to those types of opinions from our own really set a tone of the culture within our association. So we would encourage it. We would, of course, always anticipate any of those opinions raised or questions asked are done so in a respectful manner, and works alongside our values. But yeah, there's a place for everybody here, and we will have people with many varying different opinions on all types of topics.
Thank you for that, Helen. Paul?
Yeah, certainly I agree with that perspective. There's been certainly no shortage of opinions, particularly as you drill down on various topics. And I know in our all-staff meetings, at times someone will raise an opinion or raise a concern which you automatically know others are perhaps harboring or thinking about, but just not voicing it. So I think taking the time to say, I appreciate the fact that you're voicing that opinion. You're likely not the only individual to hold it, and to have that respectful dialogue from there is important. So I think I agree with the approach that you've laid out, Helen, and certainly it's been our approach to I think to reinforce those opinions that are perhaps on the fringes, but nonetheless are valid because they're rooted in, their experience, their perspective, their history, as it relates to what they've been through and perhaps what they're dealing with individually. So to encourage those and to certainly provide some validation that they should be raised.
Well, thank you for that. And it was interesting, you both chose the word respect. So thank you. So we're going to move into about stress and the anxiety. And prior to COVID, the words were 1 in 5 we're going to experience mental health. Now it's top of mind. A recent HR survey in Canada said going back to work, COVID, pandemic, stress and anxiety, #1 concern for leaders. So interestingly enough, our viewers wanted to know how each of you is dealing with the stress, the anxiety, the unknown. Do you have any tips and tricks that you'd like to share with us and our viewers?
Well, I certainly haven't been able to go to the Y for the last couple of months, so I've had to replace that with some other things. But you know, certainly just the basics of good sleep, good diet, and getting some exercise in, and that certainly has been a challenge, I think, for most through the pandemic. Whenever certainly gyms and places like the Y, where I'm a member, are closed and we don't have access to it. So, I've replaced that with some bike rides, some long walks. We happen to have adopted a dog through this because we were not planning on any international travel over the next year or two. So we adopted a dog, and certainly spending time outside, particularly in Northern Ontario, has been helpful for me personally. And really to try and take a moment to be present whenever you're doing those activities. So, if I think of last night, I went for a long off-leash walk with this new dog that we have, and just trying to be present in terms of taking in what's around me, my surroundings, and not thinking too far ahead about what tomorrow brings or what the next week brings, but just, being present, being mindful. I think those techniques are important through this time.
And you've certainly maintained your sense of humor and your smile. That's important to note because both of you seem to have big smiles. So Helen?
I would just say ditto to everything that Paul's just described. From an organizational perspective, we also try to provide a lot of virtual content for members and non-members, all free, Y Thrive, Y Gym, Y Camp. For those folks who did choose to access some ideas for health and wellness when at home and in lockdown. Personally, I'm an avid runner, so similarly, I love to get outside on the trail and take some time to connect with nature and maybe run off some of that stress. I'm not sure it works, in all honesty, all the time, but definitely to keep that balance, staying connected, however, remotely to family and friends. Back to your point, Angel, around how it is important to maintain communication. We've seen that with our members who were similar to your COVID calls with your staff. We thought they'd be quick check-ins to make sure everyone had what they needing to isolate, but they were all largely, 45 minutes to an hour long, and very much well received with those calls.
So I know each of you in different parts of the conversation have both mentioned your values and the values of the organizations that you work in. And as we look at some of the stress and anxiety, are you using any of your values to help guide some of your decision making around that and to provide more care to your clients, or because we both have clients, WSN and YMCA, or your internal teams, or to either industries that you're serving?
Yeah, it's certainly our values of compassion, integrity, respect, and team spirit. I'd really call them our filters. So we filter everything through those values so that we ensure as we're making decisions that we're true to those values. And you can break them each down. I think early on in the pandemic, certainly team and team spirit was important. So reinforcing with everyone that we're in this together, we'll get through this together as a team. I think for many individuals, job security early on was important. So just, reinforcing the fact that we're a team, we'll make decisions as a team, we'll get through this as a team, I thought was perhaps the most important value early on in the pandemic as we start communicating regularly with staff. But certainly compassion, and from my perspective, compassion means, again, being employee-centric, thinking of this from each individual's perspective, but also as a leader to be vulnerable, to ensure that everyone understands that the insecurities, that the stresses, the anxieties, that they're experiencing are the same emotions that we're experiencing as leaders. We're not immune to that just because we're in a leadership position. And then integrity, I would say, Angel, is really around integrity of communication, making sure that we're providing all of the information that we have on hand, being open and honest with that communication. And then finally, respect. So respect for diversity of opinion. And I would say respect in terms of involvement in decisions. So again, as I spoke to, involvement from subject matter experts in conducting risk assessments, involvements from the Joint Health and Safety Committee in terms of vetting those. I think that demonstrates respect for the input of those that are going to be touched by those controls, and helps to ensure that they have some comfort that we're doing everything within our power to ensure that the environment that they're walking into is as safe as humanly possible, and we put all of the controls in place that we need to put in place to protect our own people.
Thank you. Helen, your perspective?
Yeah, we have 6 core values, and they align quite closely: caring, honesty, respect, collaborative, inclusive, and responsible. And it certainly does guide us in every action that we try to take. And in the context that everything we do is founded on those values and all building healthy communities, whether it's our internal staff community or the external Sudbury, North Bay, Northeastern Ontario, it really helps frame how we approach everything. I'm certain that we can still improve in some of those categories, which again brings us back to more collaboration, more inclusivity of thoughts and opinions, and we'll continue to improve on that part as well.
Okay, I'm going to go a little off script here, so Gabby, bear with me for a moment. But I do see on the oh yeah, she loves when I do that. To the right of my page, somebody has jotted this down to panelists, and we have a little bit of time, so I'm going to pose the question to you, Paul and Helen. It says workplaces which have remained open and those that have reopened have done a phenomenal job at implementing controls to protect against the transmission of the virus. That said, it's beginning to feel like COVID fatigue is starting to set in, and folks are wanting a return to the normal opposed to a new normal. What are your thoughts on keeping this real for those in Northern Ontario where outbreaks have been minimal to this point? And the reason I did go off script, because it talks to many things that we're talking about today: different viewpoints, stress, anxiety, respect, and returning to work.
You know, I think it's in a very, very astute comment that interview person has just made. Personally, I have been able to work in the office throughout the duration of the pandemic. And by virtue of the fact that thankfully we're in Northeastern Ontario and have had a very low caseload, I would agree that we have been a bit nervous for our staff, particularly have been in the office, that we could come complacent around COVID-19, and because we really haven't felt it, thankfully. And so we are really trying to make sure that we continue to check in ourselves and compare ourselves to the standards that we've set. We will be, again, leveraging Workplace Safety North to come in and do some risk assessments for us within our health, fitness, and aquatics prior to open. To, again, is that third-party assessment work with our management team, joint health safety committees, to make sure we've got all the right protocol in place. It's just something that through my conversation at all levels, we've asked for their support on. Because we do so many clients and members from the broader community, everyone at some point will probably have some level of fatigue. So we've asked for their help to continue to remind people that even if the caseload is very minimal, and let's hope it's to zero, until such time that a vaccine available or immunity is built up, there's still a risk for COVID-19 out there, and we have to take it seriously. We do believe that it's going to take our community as a whole, our partners, the government, to continue trying to and educate and build awareness around this. Because, all of us want it to kind of go away and we can get back to normal and international travel and barbecue without having to worry about masks with friends, but that's going to take quite a while, and we are imagine it could be as much as 18 to 24 plus months before we're truly in a different environment. So it'll take all of us, I think, to find ways to get over that fatigue.
Thank you, Helen. Paul?
Yeah, agreed. You know, I think particularly in Northern Ontario, we've had the luxury of a very low case count, which does lead to, I think, individuals wanting to relax the measures that have been communicated to us from our health officials in terms of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate in terms of bubbles and in terms of gatherings. So, you know, certainly we've seen across the country just this past week an uptick in some of the provinces. And I think it's a good reminder to say, listen, you know, until there is a vaccine, we're certainly, as a society, we're vulnerable to this virus. So just to reinforce the message that as much as there's some fatigue out there, certainly I think what we've done internally is to say, listen, you know, it's good to take some time. It's good to enjoy what Northern Ontario has to offer and the space that we have, the luxury of space that we have. Certainly take advantage of that. And I think that helps, particularly Northerners, to say, okay, I have some sense of normalcy here because I have this abundance of space. I can take advantage of it. I can use it and provide some normalcy for me, as much as that, to your point, Helen, does not maybe involve a barbecue with, you know, 30 other people around. It still brings some sense of normalcy because you're taking advantage of that space the way you normally would, but perhaps just not with as many people around. So important to just reinforce the messages that we're getting from our local health units, from our provincial health leaders, and reinforce that message internally and externally, so that we all continue to do our part and hopefully stay where we are in terms of case count over the fall, and particularly as you know, as we get into November and we're thinking about flu season. Certainly, if you listen to leading epidemiologists, they're certainly you know, letting us know that there's the potential for a second wave, and likely in the fall. So I would say now is not the time to let our guard down. Now is the time to, I think, retrench, make sure we're doing everything individually and organizationally that we should be doing to support the low case count that we currently have.
Okay, thank you for that. There's been a lot of controversy around masks, and Helen, in one of the other conversations, you did note about your frontline staff talking and what you anticipate could be some member-to-member controversy or staff to member. So when you were designing your return to work, or for our organizations that are with us and have always been working, how did you deal with the whole mask policy? Was there going to be a policing? Were you going to ask people to leave who didn't follow your policy? How were you going to deal with the people who were exempt from wearing masks? Can you share a little bit about your experiences that you had around the masks?
Yeah, we've certainly really worked on the basis of explaining to people what our requests for the protocols are in terms of mask wearing, and really encouraging staff, as well as anyone who's utilizing our facility, to wear them. In knowing there are exemptions for mask wearing, we are not asking staff to intervene in the event that someone isn't wearing a mask. We will work on the presumption that they have a valid reason. It doesn't mean we're not going to continue to have posters up and remind people, right, and really role model the right practices, which is what you would see today with our day camps. All our camp counselors are wearing the masks. Different in those cohorts don't have to, based on their age, but you know, in a childcare setting, the same is true. So we, right from the get-go, moved towards masks once we were seeing that the public health guidelines were heading that way prior to mandates coming out. We just want to take that extra step to protect everybody.
Okay, thank you.
But we won't act as a police.
Okay, thank you for that, Helen. Paul?
Yeah, very similar. So we certainly have a face covering policy that applies both to internal staff and external or clients coming into our physical premises. But similar to the approach that you described, Helen, we're implementing it as in a way that we're not enforcing it. We're not going to ask if there's a limitation on wearing masks. We're not asking for proof. We certainly used guidance from North Bay, Parry Sound District Health Unit in terms of developing that policy. So it's really meant to educate, and it's an opportunity to educate if individuals do not want to wear a mask. We'll use that as an opportunity to educate, but we're certainly not going to police it. We're not going to refuse entry, and the policy reflects that type of approach of taking a way to really just to educate on what are the advantages of wearing a mask, but certainly not enforcing it in a way that we're going to be policing it.
Okay, great, thank you. I had someone tell me recently that they felt that they were being ostracized because their point of view was very different than the general public. As a leader, how would you use your influence to ensure that they are also being listened to and respected within your workplaces?
I think, similar to what we talked about earlier, Angel, just, creating a culture and an atmosphere that individuals feel safe to be able to raise that opinion, that diverging opinion. And again, knowing that it's rooted likely in history, their experience, their feelings regarding whatever aspect of the pandemic we're speaking to. So certainly trying to create and respond to those individual incidents in a way that is respectful and in a way that the individual feels that their perspective has been heard, but also use that as an opportunity to perhaps educate, to talk about the science, talk about what our public health officials are telling us, depending on, again, the individual circumstance that's being raised.
Okay, and Helen, I'll give you the opportunity to answer the same question, and then we'll go to you, Gabby.
Very similar. It would be about trying to create that sort of conversation, make sure that everyone always feels they can express their opinion. And in the event that there's a difference of opinion that the conversation has solved, I mean, we do fall back to the public health guidelines, recognizing that as a charity, we work with a lot of people that would fall in vulnerable sector, all kinds of different shapes and forms. And so it's imperative for us as an organization to put in place all those health guidelines and perhaps take an additional step to make sure we're protecting everybody.
All right, thank you, Helen. Hello, Gabby.
Hi, Angel. So this is a general question. They're asking, with so much information about COVID-19, including the falsehoods, how do we know what and who to trust for the real and accurate information on behalf of ourselves and our employees?
Thanks, Gabby. And thanks for the viewer.
Yeah. Good question. Again, we will fall back to the official public health guidelines, either from our local health unit, recommending that can be some slightly different interpretations. So we look at that in terms of the Sudbury context that we work in, the Parry Sound, North Bay context, etc., as well as the Ontario Medical Health guidance is. Those are the primary areas that we go to for reliable information on COVID-19.
Yes, certainly the same for us. I think, perhaps the comment is rooted in just what's changed over this pandemic. So certainly early in the pandemic, things were still emerging in terms of controls and in terms of spread, what that looks like, and in terms of what we need to do both individually and organizationally. But we've certainly linked ourselves back to both the public health units, and I would agree with the two, because our two main facilities are in North Bay and Sudbury, and also provincial authorities. So, taking that information, ensuring we're communicating it out, and ensuring anything we develop is rooted in that science and is rooted in the latest information that we're being provided. But I think it's a very valid observation, because things have changed as time has evolved over the last, I guess, almost 6 months now.
Okay, thank you. So just one of our final questions will be this. This is a scenario-based question, and I'll use myself in this scenario. I don't want to put any of our viewers on the spot or any of our team members. So I've had a very large party at my home, and one of my teammates finds out about that, and I've come back to the office on a Monday. So I've had this party on a Saturday. I haven't practiced any social distancing, and there was no masks involved. And then I've showed up on a Monday. The question about the scenario was, how are we going to ensure that there's respect in the workplace as we have this conversation? I'm assuming there's going to be a conversation. And two, what is going to guide your conversation at that point with me? I'm going to say it's me. So Helen, I see you smiling, so I'm going to choose you first to answer.
I was going to let her first.
Okay, Paul's smiling.
Yeah, you know what, I think it's going to be inevitable. I think that we will have a potential situation. Ultimately it still comes down to the fact that we will respect individual decisions they make and have no intention to police people, again, outside of work. We'll continue to reinforce that we care about the health and safety of staff, members, community, when they're in our workplaces, but when they're at home too. And really through kind of the ongoing conversations around education of what we're expecting, and encourage people that in the event that they think that they've been exposed, or had the potential of being exposed, to follow up and take tests. But, we would certainly not point fingers or identify individuals in those situations. It would continue to be a general population conversation, because potentially for every story you heard, there are the people that may have been doing something similar, just nobody knows about it. So, I think we're going to have to recognize that everyone has different tolerances for risk. We probably all do, for all kinds of reasons, and all we can do, I think, as an employer and in our workplace is continue to educate, build this, and role model the behaviors that we would like to see in everybody. Well said, Helen. Paul?
Yeah, I'm hoping this was your 10-person bubble and you were just noisier than most, and that happened. But I agree with Helen's perspective. Certainly I think individuals, and particularly, again, I think in Northeastern Ontario, and I think we've seen this also with perhaps different age groups, that, again, just their risk for tolerance may be higher, or their risk tolerance is higher in terms of their behaviors, and certainly reinforcing the messages of maintaining that 10-person bubble, maintaining physical distancing, good hygiene practices is really, I think, as organizations, that's really our role, to be able to do that whenever we have a captive audience here at work. But hopefully that message resonates, and that results in behaviors that align to what we would expect of our team members, and I think it links back to our values, particularly as it relates to respect, and thinking about how do I respect the employees that I work with, and certainly being true to the guidance we're being given provincially would be important. But we're not going to be driving around on the weekend to see how large that party is out at your place, Angèle. But
thank you for that, Paul. I'll stop looking for you then on the weekends. All joking aside, as we near the end of our conversation, it's interesting to listen to our viewers and Paul and Helen when we talk about respect, and we're talking about it in the realm of a COVID conversation, really respect is respect. It doesn't matter if it's about COVID, if it's about anything else. And I think you've demonstrated to our viewers today that sometimes we lose sight of this is COVID, but really it goes back to respect, active listening, kindness, making sure everybody feels like they've been heard, being inclusive, showing you care. I think Paul used the word transparent leadership. So I think it's a good reminder to each of us that's on the call and our viewers that even though if we take COVID out of the conversation, it's still the mainstays of how we work and treat people. So I thank each of you for those reminders, because sometimes we forget about the simple things, you know, like going back to kindergarten and relearning some of those things. So as leaders, I wanted to thank you each for your perspectives today. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers have. So for our viewers, we're going to be saying goodbye, but I want you to stay with us for the last few minutes because they're probably some of the most important. For those of you who have been with us before, you know that the end of the conversation always ends with our guests. And what we do is we ask them for their words of wisdom. And today we're going to be asking them for words of wisdom on respect. And while I give them about 20 seconds to just context their thoughts, I want to share with you that we're looking at another COVID conversation in September, and we would really like your input into a topic, or if you'd like to be a speaker with us, that would be great. So when you receive your evaluation form, if you could just put it there. So I want to say goodbye. I want to wish those of you who are returning to work, returning to school, or supporting somebody who's doing either of those, best of luck to you. So Helen, I'd like to turn it over to you for your final words of wisdom on respect. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure they're all that wise. I think that respect is something that we all just need to continue to practice day in, day out. And it reminds me a little bit of old adage now, I guess, of just be kind. We don't know how someone has experienced the start of their day or whatever else is going on in their background and their context. We are all making decisions with some biases that we've grown up with and have kind of historically experienced. So the more we can just create that open dialogue and listen actively to each other, that helps build those respectful communities and climate we all want to work within. And certainly for me, at least, when I'm in a workplace that's demonstrating that kind of behavior, it's a workplace I want to be in and stay in and enjoy working with my colleagues that way.
Thank you, Helen. And Paul?
Yeah, you know, I think first and foremost, from a respect perspective, you know, knowing that individual perspectives are rooted in their past experiences, are rooted in what they have going on in their lives. And we certainly, to your point, Helen, we don't know that history. We don't know what's influencing their perspective. So I think in terms of showing respect, always keep that in mind, that we really don't know all of the things that are going on behind that perspective. And I think as we collectively get through this pandemic, you know, both as leaders and as organizations, I think we'll be judged on how compassionate we were, how kind we were, how we demonstrated respect in very difficult times, and how we communicated with integrity, and hopefully a little vulnerability, so that individuals understand that, listen, we're not in this alone, we're in this together. And we're all experiencing many of the same things. So I think I'd leave it at that, Angel.
Well, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Gabby. And most importantly, thank you to our virtual viewers. Until next time, stay safe and keep smiling. Goodbye.
Thank you, Angel.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Everyone.